Welcome. So, you've been looking into some really interesting foundational stuff on UI design, focusing on the visual side of things.
That's right. It's fascinating how these core elements really build the entire experience.
It really is, and I'm keen to unpack that today. Our, let's say, mission is to really get into the essentials of visual layout, color, and typography. Because these aren't just, decoration, they're fundamental to making interfaces work well.
Absolutely. And I like to think of them as, well, like the three legs of a stool for visual design.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, each one is totally essential. If one leg is wobbly, the whole thing, the whole interface, it just becomes unstable, doesn't work as well, and frankly, doesn't look as good.
Right. So where do we start? Which leg first?
Let's kick things off with the basic structure, the skeleton, if you will, visual layout.
Okay, visual layout. So what exactly is that? I mean, it sounds straightforward, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just like putting stuff on a screen.
You're spot on. It's definitely more than just random placement. Visual layout is really the strategic arrangement and organization of everything you see. Buttons, text, images, forms, the whole shebang.
Strategic arrangement.
Yeah. A good way to picture it is maybe like architecture for a building, or maybe a blueprint for a machine. It shows where everything goes and how it all fits together.
Got it. And why is getting that arrangement right so important? What are the actual benefits?
Well, a solid visual layout brings quite a few key advantages. First, it essentially acts like a roadmap. It guides the user's eye through the interface.
Okay, so it tells you where to look.
Exactly. It creates a clear path, shows you the flow. And second, it creates a sense of order and clarity.
Sure.
A well-organized layout stops users from feeling swamped by visual clutter, makes finding things much easier.
Yeah, I've definitely bounced off sites that just felt like a mess, too much going on.
We all have. And it goes beyond just looking tidy. Layout establishes hierarchy. It visually signals what's important.
Like what you should do first.
Precisely. What's the main action? What's just supporting info? The layout should communicate that almost instantly. And all of this leads to improved usability. The interaction feels more intuitive, less thinking required.
Makes sense.
And of course, let's not forget, a balanced, thought-out layout just looks better. It contributes massively to the aesthetic appeal.
Okay, so it's the underlying framework.
Yeah.
What are some of the key concepts within visual layout we should really understand?
Right, there are several core ideas. Let's start with hierarchy. We touched on it, but it's about making the important stuff stand out.
How do you do that?
Well, there are a few main tools. Size is a big one. Larger things grab attention naturally. Then there's color. A bright or contrasting color really makes an element pop.
Okay.
Placement is also key. For Western audiences reading left to right, things at the top left tend to get noticed first. Higher up, more prominent positions.
Right, our reading habits.
Exactly. And interestingly, white space. That empty space around something, it can really isolate and emphasize an element. It's surprisingly powerful. Some studies even show users spot the main call to action in milliseconds because of good hierarchy.
It's weird how nothing the empty space can do so much. So after hierarchy, what's next?
After you've figured out what needs emphasis, the next principle is proximity. Basically, things that are related should be grouped together visually.
So grouping implies connection.
Exactly. Think about a web form. The label for, say, email address should be right next to the input box, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Or the submit button should be close to the form it submits. It visually links them. It taps into Gestalt principles. Our brains just see things that are close together as belonging together. Helps users understand relationships without explicit instructions.
Got it. Proximity. What else?
Following that, we have alignment.
Alignment. Okay, lining things up. Seems basic, but why is it so crucial?
Because it creates such a strong sense of order, visual coherence. When text, buttons, images, whatever, when they're aligned along these invisible lines, left, right, center, the whole design just feels clear, more polished, intentional.
Ah, so it avoids that jagged, messy look.
Precisely. Designers often use grid systems underlying columns and rows to keep alignment consistent across the board. It sounds simple, but bad alignment can make an interface feel, well, a bit unprofessional, maybe even untrustworthy, subconsciously.
That underlying grid makes a lot of sense for keeping things tidy. You mentioned white space again earlier. Let's dig a bit deeper there. Why is negative space so important?
Right. White space or negative space, it's the area between and around things on the screen. And it is absolutely not wasted space. It's critical.
How so?
Well, first, it reduces visual clutter. Gives elements breathing room, stops the screen feeling overwhelming. Second, it massively improves readability, especially for text. That space around paragraphs makes reading much easier.
Okay, readability.
Third, strategically, you can use white space to draw attention to specific things by isolating them. And finally, it often adds a feeling of balance and elegance. Think about high-end websites. They often use white space very generously. It feels sophisticated.
So don't just fill every pixel. Got it. What about moving between screens in an app? Does layout play a role there?
Hugely. That's where consistency in layout is absolutely key. Users need predictable patterns.
Like the navigation menu always being in the same spot?
Exactly. Navigation, button styles, the overall structure. It should feel familiar as you move around. It makes the interface much easier to learn and use. I mean, I've definitely used apps where the back button seems to jump around.
Oh, that's frustrating.
It really is. And while that's merely a consistency failure, it also messes with your mental map of how the app works, impacting usability beyond just layout. It breaks that expectation.
Right. Predictability is important. Okay, one more layout concept you mentioned, balance.
Yes, balance. This is about how the visual weight is distributed on the screen. Different elements feel heavier based on their size, color, complexity.
Visual weight. Okay.
And you can achieve balance in generally two ways. There's symmetrical balance, where elements are mirrored across a central line. It feels very formal, stable. Think of a logo centered with equal stuff on both sides.
Okay, formal.
Then there's asymmetrical balance. Here, elements are arranged unevenly, but they still create a sense of equilibrium. It often feels more dynamic, more interesting visually.
So asymmetrical isn't unbalanced, it's just balanced differently.
Exactly. It uses contrast and positioning to achieve that balance.
This is really helpful for understanding the structure. Do you have a quick tip for someone just starting to think about layout?
Absolutely. My biggest tip, start with sketching. Use simple boxes or rectangles to represent elements. That's called wireframing.
Wireframing. Okay.
Yeah, focus only on the structure, the organization, how things relate. Don't worry about colors or fonts or images yet. Just layout. And also start actively looking at the apps you use every day. Try to spot the hierarchy, the alignment, the white space. How does it affect your experience?
Great advice. Observe and sketch. Okay, so we've built the skeleton with layout. Now let's talk about adding some flesh and feeling. Our second leg, color.
Right, so color in UI design is way more than just making things pretty. It's about consciously choosing and applying hues. Saturation, that's the intensity of the color and brightness.
For what purpose, though?
Well, the main goals are to communicate meaning, to evoke certain emotions or feelings, and to help organize the information you're seeing.
It's amazing how much a color can communicate almost instantly.
It really is. Color seriously shapes how we perceive and interact with digital stuff. For starters, it sets the mood and brand personality.
Like making an app feel fun or serious?
Exactly. Fun, serious, trustworthy, luxurious. Color does a lot of that heavy lifting for branding. Then strategically, color draws attention. Think of a bright sign-up button or a red notification badge.
Catches your eye.
It also conveys information through common conventions. Like red usually means error or danger. Green often signals success or go. Gray might mean something is inactive.
Yeah, those feel pretty universal online.
They often are.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to remember cultural context. For example, red means luck in some Eastern cultures, not danger. So know your audience.
Good point. What else does color do?
Well, it helps with organization. You can use color to visually group related items or maybe differentiate different sections of an interface. And yes, of course, it enhances aesthetics, makes things visually appealing, more engaging.
And you mentioned something critical earlier.
Ah, yes. Accessibility. This is non-negotiable. Using colors with proper contrast is absolutely essential. Users with visual impairments need to be able to see text against its background and distinguish important graphics.
So contrast is key for accessibility. Okay, let's dive into some color concepts. You mentioned color psychology.
Yes. Color psychology looks at how different colors tend to make people feel or what they associate with them. It's not an exact science, but there are strong tendencies.
Like what?
Well, blue, for instance, often suggests trust, calm, stability. That's why so many banks and tech companies use it.
Makes sense.
Red often means urgency, passion, maybe danger, error. Think warning signs or sales promotions. Green usually connects to nature, growth, success, health. You see it for confirmation messages, eco-brands.
Okay.
Yellow can be optimism, warmth, but also a warning signal, so you use it carefully. Orange often feels enthusiastic, creative, friendly. Purple can evoke royalty, luxury, maybe creativity. Black often feels sophisticated, powerful, elegant, and white or gray suggest cleanliness, simplicity, neutrality, great for backgrounds.
It's really interesting how we have these built-in associations. How do you actually combine these colors effectively? It can't just be random.
Definitely not. Understanding color schemes helps a lot. There are a few basic types. A monochromatic scheme uses different shades and tints of just one single color. It's usually very harmonious, subtle.
Okay, one color, different variations.
Right. Then analogous colors are neighbors on the color wheel like blue, blue-green, green. They also tend to look good together, very harmonious.
Like a family of colors.
Kind of. Complementary colors are direct opposites on the wheel, like blue and orange. They create really high contrast, very vibrant. You have to use them carefully, though. Can be jarring if overdone.
High energy.
Yeah. And triadic schemes use 3 colors evenly spaced on the wheel. These are often vibrant, too, and definitely need careful balancing.
So there's a science to picking combos. Is there a rule for how much of each color to use?
There's a very helpful guideline called the 60-30-10 rule. It's not rigid, but it's a good starting point for balance.
60-30-10? Okay, how does that work?
The idea is roughly 60% of your design uses your primary color, often the main brand color, or maybe neutral for large background areas.
Okay, the dominant color.
Then about 30% is for your secondary color. This should complement the primary. Good for things like secondary buttons or maybe highlighting the active state of something.
Right, the supporting color.
And the final 10% is for your accent color. This should be a contrasting color used sparingly for the really important bits you want to pop, like call to action buttons, notifications, that kind of thing.
60-30-10. That sounds really practical for building a palette. And we keep coming back to accessibility.
Because it's that important. Ensuring enough contrast between text and its background, and also between important graphics and their background, isn't optional. It's fundamental for users with low vision or color blindness.
How do you check that?
You should always use online contrast checking tools. They measure your color pairs against the standards, like the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Make it part of your workflow.
Got it. Check the contrast. And color also signals interaction, right? Like when you hover over a button.
Exactly. We use color variations to show the different states of interactive elements. A button has a default look, right?
Yeah.
Then it might change color slightly on hover, change again when you press it or when it's active. If it's disabled, it's often grayed out. And there's usually a distinct look for focus, like when you tab onto it using a keyboard.
Those little visual cues.
They're crucial. They give immediate feedback, tell the user what's happening, what's interactive.
So much to think about with color. What's a good starting point for someone new to this?
Keep it simple initially. Start with a limited palette, a primary color, a neutral, like gray or white, and one strong accent color.
Primary, neutral, accent. Okay.
If you're working with a brand, stick to their guidelines, obviously. And use tools. Things like Adobe Color or Coolers are great for exploring palettes. And I'll say it again, always, always check your contrast ratios for accessibility.
Excellent. Check contrast. Okay, so we've got structure with layout, emotion and meaning with color. That brings us to the third leg of our stool, typography.
Yes, typography. This is essentially the art and technique of arranging text. So it's legible, readable, and visually appealing.
Legible and readable. Are they different?
Good question. Yes. Legibility is about how easily you can distinguish individual letters or characters. Readability is about how easily you can scan and understand longer passages of text. Typography covers both.
Okay.
So it involves choosing fonts or typefaces, setting sizes, controlling line length, line spacing called leading, letter spacing, tracking, and just structuring the text well overall.
So definitely more than just picking a font you like the look of.
Oh, absolutely. Good typography is vital. Its primary job is ensuring readability and legibility. If people can't read the text comfortably, everything else fails.
Yeah, fundamental.
But it also conveys tone and personality. The font choice really impacts the feel, aligning it with the brand. Think formal versus playful.
Yeah, a font can feel serious or fun.
Exactly. Typography also establishes hierarchy within your text, content making headings stand out from body text, showing the structure of the information. It guides the user, helping them scan content quickly. And of course, well-executed typography just makes the whole design look more polished and professional, adds to the overall aesthetic.
It really does seem to underpin both function and form. Let's talk about choosing fonts. There are thousands out there. Where do you even start?
It can feel overwhelming, but we can break them down into broad categories. First, serif fonts. These have the little strokes or serifs at the ends of letters. Think Times New Roman, Georgia.
The classic book style.
Kind of. They often feel traditional, formal. Great for print body text, but sometimes less ideal for screen body text, especially at small sizes,
Hmm.
as those little details can blur.
Okay, then the opposite.
Sans serif. Sans meaning without, no little strokes. Think Arial, Helvetica, Roboto, Open Sans. These usually look more modern, clean. They're super popular for digital interfaces because they tend to stay clear and legible on screens of all sizes.
So sans serif is generally safer for screens.
Often, yes. Those screen resolutions are getting so good that some serifs work fine now, too. But sans serif is still a very common choice. Then you have script fonts, which look like handwriting.
Fancy curly ones?
Yeah, use those very sparingly. Maybe for a logo or a very short decorative heading. Never for body text, they're hard to read in bulk. And finally, display fonts. These are designed specifically for large sizes, like big headlines or logos, often quite unique or stylized. Again, not for body text.
Got it. So mostly stick to serif and sans serif for the main text.
Generally, yes. And a key rule of thumb. Try to limit yourself to just 1 or 2 font families for a project. Keeps things consistent and clean. Maybe one for headings, one for body text. Or sometimes you find a versatile font family with lots of weights and use that for everything.
1 or 2 families. That simplifies things. So once you have your fonts, how do you create that hierarchy within the text itself?
You create font hierarchy using visual contrast. The most obvious way is size. Headings are bigger than subheadings, which are bigger than body text.
Yep.
Simple but effective.
Size. What else?
Weight. Using bold or heavier font weights for headings makes them stand out clearly. That's standard practice. You can also use color for subtle differences, maybe making subheadings a slightly lighter shade. And style, like using italics, but use that sparingly, maybe for emphasis or captions.
So size, weight, color, style, combined to show importance. What about just making the text easy to read? What are the key readability factors?
Several things are crucial here. Font size for body text is number 1. It needs to be comfortable. Around 16 pixels is a common starting point for web mobile, but it depends on the font
16px baseline.
and line length,
Yeah.
or measure, how wide the text block is. You generally want between 45 and 75 characters per line for comfortable reading. Too short is choppy, too long makes it hard to track back to the next line.
45 to 75 characters. Interesting.
Line spacing, or leading. The vertical space between lines, super important. Needs enough room so lines don't blend together. Aim for maybe 1.2 to 1.5 times the font size.
So more space than the font height itself.
Right. And lastly, letter spacing, or tracking. The overall space between letters. Usually the default is fine for body text, but sometimes you adjust it slightly for headings. There's also kerning, which is spacing between specific letter pairs, but fonts often handle that.
Wow. Okay. Size, line length, line spacing, letter spacing. Lots to consider. What about text alignment? Does that matter much for UI readability?
Oh, absolutely. Left-aligned text is usually the easiest to read for paragraphs in English and other left-to-right languages. Your eye has a consistent starting point for each new line.
Makes sense.
Center-aligned is okay for short titles or maybe buttons, but it's hard work for reading longer text because the starting edge is ragged. Right-aligned is generally avoided for anything more than a short label.
And justified, like in newspapers.
Justified text, aligned on both left and right, can look neat in print, but on screens it often creates weird gaps, rivers of white space between words. It can harm readability unless you have really sophisticated hyphenation and control, so generally best avoided in UI.
So stick to left align for body text mostly. Got it. What's your main piece of advice for typography beginners?
Prioritize readability above everything else.
Hmm.
Choose proven, legible fonts, especially for body text. Roboto, Open Sans, Larido are solid choices. Define a clear typographic scale, H1 size weight, H2 size weight, body size weight, etc., and stick to it consistently throughout your design. Consistency is king.
Prioritize readability, define a scale. Great takeaways. Okay. We've looked at layout, color, and typography individually. Now, how do they all actually mesh together in a real interface?
They're totally interconnected. They have to
Uh-huh.
work together harmoniously. Let's think about that simple login screen example again.
Okay.
The layout puts the logo, the input fields, maybe stacked, centered, and the login button in specific places.
Mm-hmm.
It uses alignment and proximity to group things logically. It uses white space so it doesn't feel cluttered. That's the structure.
Scale.
Then color adds another layer. Maybe the primary brand color is used for the main login button, that's the 10% accent, making it the clear call to action. The background is probably a neutral 60%. Maybe red is used only for error messages if login fails. Perhaps the input field border subtly changes color on focus, part of the 30% secondary usage maybe?
Adding meaning and focus.
Exactly. And finally, typography ensures everything is clear. A clean sans serif font for legibility. Login as a headline might be larger and bolder, hierarchy. The labels, email, password, are clear, readable, maybe slightly smaller but distinct. The text on the button is easy to read.
So layout structures it, color gives it meaning and priority, and typography makes the message clear and sets the tone.
You've got it. Layout provides the structure, color adds meaning and visual priority. Typography delivers the message clearly and fits the tone. They're inseparable for good visual design.
This has been incredibly insightful. It really feels like we've unpacked the building blocks. It's clear this is just scratching the surface, but understanding these foundations feels so crucial. What's the next step for someone listening who wants to really solidify this?
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. The best way forward is active learning. First, observation. Start really looking at the apps and websites you use. Critically, ask, why this layout? Why these colors? What's the typography doing? Question everything.
Become a critical user.
Exactly. Second, practice. Start sketching simple screens. Try recreating parts of apps you like. It forces you to analyze their choices. Experiment with layouts, palettes, fonts. Just play around.
Don't be afraid to try things.
Not at all. And third, tool learning. Get comfortable with a design tool like Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD. Actually applying these principles in a tool makes them stick. See how layout, color, and type interact when you're building something.
Observe, practice, use the tools. Great actionable advice. It's funny how these elements we barely notice consciously can make the difference between an interface feeling effortless or just frustrating.
It's so true. That feeling of intuitiveness or frustration often boils down to how well these fundamental principles, layout, color, typography, have been applied, whether intentionally or not. It highlights the craft behind even the simplest screens.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for shedding light on these essential building blocks today. It gives us a lot to think about and observe in our own digital interactions.